Once he reaches the abandoned train tracks, he makes his way to a fence, bending down and dropping the item that he is carrying, which we now know is Courtney's body. He then walks away from it, picking up one or two things before walking back to the body in an attempt to cover it up. He then walks away from Courtney's body, later putting his hands on his head. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Makeup Mayhem True Crime with me, your host, Bella Monsoon. Today's case made headlines in South Africa when it first broke due to the violent and cruel nature of the crime, as well as the age of the victim. As a South African woman, I unfortunately know that this case is not the only one of its kind, with the reality being that every single day in South Africa, so many women and children face many dangers associated with simply existing. In the Western Cape alone, 215 children were killed within a 14-month period, from the 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of March 2021. And those are only the official murders registered at police stations. And how does one even begin to fathom and understand that the person who was good friends with your boyfriend, the person whose child played with your child, the person who shared your home was the very same person who killed your child? But before we get into that, for those of you who are new, let me introduce myself. So here it is in a nutshell. I'm a mental health professional who just so happens to be obsessed with makeup, true crime, and uncovering the motives that drive people to do what they do. That means that every single week I post a brand new video looking at a real-life crime from a psychological viewpoint. Oh, and just in case that wasn't enough, I also happen to complete a full makeup look whilst discussing these cases. During these episodes, I also try to share psychological knowledge and concepts that you may or may not already know in an easy to understand format. So if that all sounds like something that is just your cup of tea, then please consider subscribing and joining the Bellaboo family. As is customary, just a quick disclaimer before today's story. Today's story contains material citing graphic violence as well as the murder of a child. As always, I will issue further warnings if relevant as the story unfolds. I mean, absolutely no disrespect to the victim mentioned nor her family. The purpose of this video is to shed further light on a tragic true crime whilst spreading awareness about the psychological nature of the narrative. As always, this story has been thoroughly researched by myself and includes real-life accounts, footage, and photos from individuals who were involved directly in the case. On the 4th of September 2013, Courtney Pieters was born in Cape Town, South Africa. By the time she was 3 years old, she was a bubbly, friendly toddler, always up to play with her older siblings and children in the neighborhood, and she was a complete mommy's girl. She had 3 older siblings, Andrea, who was 21, Michaela, who was 16, and Adrian, who was 6 years old. Her mother had given her the nickname Macy Pop, and she used to squeal with glee whenever she was called that. Every evening, she would wait at the top of the stairs for her mother to return home, as she was always so excited to see her. The two were very close, and whenever her mother wasn't working, she was spending time with her. Courtney, Adrian, and Andrea lived with their parents, Juanita and Aaron Fourie, in Selbera, Elsie's River. Michaela, on the other hand, lived with a church sister just down the street. Although Aaron and Juanita had been together for over 20 years, they were not married. The house that the family all lived in belonged to Aaron's sister, who also lived there with her 2 children. Her one child, Marsha Wen, who was Aaron's niece, lived with her husband and her 2 children in the outside Wendy house structure. Her children were 9 years old and 1 year old. Juanita had worked as a cleaner at the Hungry line in Paro since around 2016. Aaron was working at a factory in Epping. So when they had extra money, they would pay Marsha Wen to look after Courtney whilst they were at work. As I mentioned, the home was quite packed with different family members. So within the home itself, there were 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 bedroom downstairs, and this is how the breakdown was. In one of the bedrooms upstairs, there was Aaron, Juanita, Courtney, her brother Adrian, as well as the older sister Andrea. Then in the other bedroom was Aaron's sister and her family. Downstairs, there was a room that was rented out, and outside in the Wendy House structure, there was Marsha Wen, her husband, and their 2 children. So there were quite a few people living in the same property. And as I just mentioned, the downstairs room in the home was rented out. And it was rented out to Mortimer Saunders. So as far as I searched and as much as I researched, I was unable to find any information on the childhood and the youth of Mortimer Henry Saunders. So age-wise, in 2017, he was 40 years old. So what I did find out was that he was known as a well-respected, decent man with a family of his own. He had 3 children, 2 daughters, one was 7 and one was 14, as well as an 8-year-old son. He was also employed at a call center. His father was also a pastor who was quite well known in the area. So for those of you who are not from South Africa, communities within areas such as Elsie's River are incredibly close-knit, and they are always looking out for one another, and they also know one another. Mortimer actually knew Aaron from school days, as well as Marsha, who was Aaron's niece. And so when a room in the house was available to be rented out, it just seemed like Mortimer would be the perfect candidate. And so in 2015, he had begun to rent the back room of Aaron and Juanita's property. Very soon, he became part of the household, with Courtney and the other young children often spending much time in his room because he had DSTV. So for my non-South African viewers, DSTV is the equivalent of satellite TV. So you have the option of very many more channels as opposed to the standard, I think we have 4 channels just normally. The kids would then spend time watching all the kids' cartoons and kiddie shows. Courtney would also spend time playing with Mortimer's daughter when she was over visiting. The kids grew very fond of Mortimer, and they even called him Uncle Morty. However, the relationship with Juanita and Mortimer was far from pleasant, and they did not like one another in the least. So when Mortimer had become intoxicated, he had spoken to Aaron, who was his good childhood friend, remember, about things that Juanita, Aaron's girlfriend, had apparently said about him. This would then cause a lot of problems within Aaron and Juanita's relationship. It's also speculated that Mortimer would accuse Juanita of not looking after the children, not cleaning their room, and not buying them clothing. So these conversations often ended in screaming and swearing between the two. Little did Juanita know, though, that their rocky relationship and the ill feelings that Mortimer held towards her would soon have tragic consequences. And so the 4th of May 2017 dawned. The day had started like any other for the families, with majority of the family members heading off to work and school. Before Juanita had left, though, she had breastfed Courtney, and she had made some porridge for both Courtney and Adrian, who was staying home from school. So Courtney was 3 years old, so she was not in school. Adrian was in school, but he was feeling ill that day, and so he had stayed home. She had then given the children kisses, and she had put them back into bed. It was at that point that Courtney had asked her to please bring her home a party pack, which was her usual request. So that day in particular, Juanita was not able to secure finances to pay Marsha, and so Courtney was left in the care of her older brother, Adrian, who was 6 years old at the time. Just so happened that day in particular, Mortimer Saunders was on leave, which had started on the 28th of April. That same morning, after Juanita had left for work, Mortimer had woken up and he had decided to use the bathroom. So, as I mentioned, many of these family members shared the same home, but there was only one bathroom in the home, and that was on the first floor. So, the house was always open, and there were always people milling in and out because that was the bathroom that had to be used. He had then used the bathroom, finished up, and then had gone back downstairs to his room. So, about 15 minutes after Mortimer had returned to his room and gotten back into bed, little Courtney had appeared at his door and she was super excited to watch some cartoons. Mortimer, however, did not share her excitement or enthusiasm as he was trying to sleep. She then wandered off to the lounge where her brother was to go and watch some regular boring TV. Now, if you have ever tried to explain the concept of time to a child, you will understand why it wasn't an hour or two later when Courtney returned, but rather it was about 30 minutes later when she came back to Mortimer's room. I mean, in her mind, it had been hours. So it was at this point that Mortimer later stated that his dislike of Juanita, combined with his annoyance at having been disturbed a second time, led him to give little Courtney ant poison. Sorry, what? How is that a normal response to a situation? How does one even begin to fathom that? Poison itself was in powder form, which he then proceeded to mix in a glass of water. So he later claimed that the only reason he had given it to her was that he wanted to make her sick and thus get back at her mother. Later toxicology reports would paint quite a different picture though. Little Courtney was hesitant to drink it, but upon being convinced by Mortimer, who you must remember she trusted, she then began to gulp it down. She stopped quite quickly though, as the taste was awful, as one can imagine. But by this time, she had already swallowed a few gulps. She had then began to cough and the mixture had gone everywhere, splattering onto her clothing, her hair, and her face. It was at this point that he had allegedly heard her name being called from the other side of the property. So I'm going to rewind ever so slightly to explain what was happening on the other end of the property while this was going on in Mortimer's room. So earlier that morning, Marsha had been in and out of her Wendy house, dropping her older daughter at her mother's house because they used to walk to school together. That was like their little tradition. And then she returned to her Wendy house and she began to clean because her baby was still asleep. She had only then walked into the main house for the first time around 8:30 that morning, to which she had found Adrian alone. She had then asked him where his sister was, to which he had replied she was watching TV with Uncle Morty. This in itself was not unusual. As I mentioned, this was something that happened quite often. And so Marsha didn't think much of it. She then went back to the Wendy house, continued some chores and looking after her baby. So like I said, she was not concerned at this point because Courtney, as far as she was aware, was with Uncle Morty. It was around 30 minutes later though when she had entered the main house again and she still saw no sign of Courtney. She had called Courtney's name a few times just to check where she was in the home. And so this is the point that we jump back into the narrative that's taking place within Mortimer's room. So it was at this point that Courtney was looking a little bit woozy. She wasn't feeling so great. She was starting to mumble, and it was then that she had heard her name being called. This was obviously Marsha calling out for her. She had then tried to respond to the calls. So it was at that point that Mortimer had freaked out. He didn't want them to find Courtney in that condition in his room. So apparently panicking, he had hit her with an open hand on her forehead before shoving a towel into her mouth and placing his hands around her throat. Initially, Courtney had thrashed up and down, but it was a few moments later when her little body had become limp. At that point in time, he had apparently then picked her up and placed her on the duvet in the corner of his room. So he had then left his room with the door wide open, only returning about 10 minutes later. On his way back to his room, he had actually bumped into Marsha. Marsha then asked him if Courtney was still with him, to which he had responded, no, she had left, but he wasn't sure where she had gone. He had then entered his room and closed the door behind him. When he had approached her body, he had noticed that her lips were blue and her body was lifeless. He also noticed that it looked as though she had vomited, as there was fluid coming out of her mouth. It was at this point that he says the realization of what he had done hit him, and he sat with Courtney's lifeless body and the TV blaring for about an hour. He had very soon realized that he needed to get rid of the body. But first, he did the unthinkable. He had pulled off her denim shorts and underwear, and using 3 of his fingers, he had then penetrated her. He had later stated that he did that so that there would be no DNA left behind, but other people would think that she had been raped. He had then stated in his confession that at this point, after penetrating her with his fingers, he had realized that there was no reaction from her. This confuses me because he had previously stated that he was aware that she was dead at this point. So obviously there would have been no reaction from her. But anyways, in his own disgusting words, once he had seen that there was no active bleeding, he had become aroused. He had then taken out his genitals and he had placed them on and around her body and then on her genitals. He would then go on to say that he had not penetrated her genitals with his genitals, but there would be a differing opinion due to the forensic evidence that was found later on. He did, however, on multiple occasions and with extreme certainty state that the sexual assault had only occurred after she was dead, thus confessing to necrophilia. Later evidence would also attempt to refute his allegation. Either way, whether it was before or after her death, the fact remains that he sexually assaulted her. He had then covered her body in the duvet and had attempted to make it fit into the plastic packaging that the duvet comes in. But to do that, he had to break her bones and bend her fragile little body. He had then got her into the bag, at which point he had left the house with the bag and her body and headed towards Epping Industria. Epping Industria is an industrial area with many factories and the like. During this time, Marsha was in and out of the main home, and at one stage she remembers seeing Mortimer's room locked with the padlock on the outside of the door. By the time Mortimer had returned home, it was late afternoon and everyone was in a panic because Courtney could not be found. Marsha was then approached by Mortimer, who had then given her a hand-typed CV, her CV, which he had promised he would do for her at the library. He then went on to state that he was in the library responding to emails and typing out her CV, and he was also looking for Courtney along his way. She had later went on to say that during this time, Mortimer was cool, calm, normal, unperturbed, and did not act suspiciously in the least. She had then wanted him to contact Juanita urgently so that she could come home, but he had told her it was best not to worry her. Juanita had then returned home from work around 4 p.m. and she was greeted by Adrian running up to her and saying, Mommy, we can't find Courtney. She's missing." She immediately dropped the bags she was carrying and she began frantically searching the house, calling out Courtney's name. She then began to go to the neighbors' homes, as Courtney often played with the neighbors' children. Like I previously mentioned, in communities like Elsie's River, everyone was super close and everyone knew one another. Unlike in many suburbs where you don't even know who lives next door to you. She had obviously had no luck, and thus she had filed a missing persons report at 7 p.m. at the Elsie's River police station. Days passed and the search became frantic, with over 100 community members and police canvassing the surrounding areas. On social media, flyers were shared to the community pages nationwide. Many false tip-offs were unfortunately given, with people stating that they saw Courtney walking around Cape Town CBD, and there were even 2 fake ransom requests. Juanita even appeared on television, sending out a heartfelt message pleading for her daughter's safe return.
That person who had my baby, just please bring her back to me. That person don't have to be scared. But all I'm asking, just bring her back to me. Because I can't go on without her. Yesterday I feel like go throw me under a car. Because I miss her too much.
It's absolutely chilling to think that this entire time, the murderer of her daughter was living in her own home just downstairs. During this time, Mortimer even comforted Juanita, going as far as placing his arm over her shoulder and telling her, "Don't cry, we will find her." I mean, what? He had helped with the searches, even telling members of the community that a person who lived across the street, Richard Maxim, might be, in his own words, a person of interest, as apparently he had seen Courtney with this man. I mean, it's really not uncommon for the alleged perpetrators to insert themselves into the investigation, but it's still incredibly disturbing. The police in the days to follow had then searched the entire property from Wendy House to both floors within the home, but they found absolutely nothing. The police would later fall under huge scrutiny from the community regarding the haphazard job that was done. 9 days later, on the 13th of May, Courtney Pieters' body was found. Pamela Schultz, who was part of the community watch, along with some other community members and the police, as well as Courtney's cousin, had been searching the backfields of the Epping factory area. It was there, buried in a shallow grave, pretty much just covered by newspapers and some branches, that she discovered Courtney's little lifeless body. She knew it was Courtney as per the description of the clothing that Juanita had given, especially the embroidered flower on her denim pants. When she was found, her navel was exposed, her zip had been pulled down, and her jeans were open and by her feet. She was also not wearing any shoes. Very shortly after, police officers and the forensic team were called to the scene. Upon arriving, someone noticed that there were cameras along the side of the field, and so they decided to check the footage. The very next day, they had obtained the footage, which they had then shown to Juanita and Aaron. At the time, they both claimed that they did not recognize the man in the video. This is the video. In watching this video, it's very clear to see that the man is carrying something as he walks through the very busy streets, past pedestrians and workers, before further on entering an open field. Throughout this entire time and video, he appears incredibly nonchalant and casual, even though he is carrying the body of a 3-year-old Courtney Pieters. Once he reaches the abandoned train tracks, he makes his way to a fence, bending down and dropping the item that he is carrying, which we now know is Courtney's body. He then walks away from it, picking up 1 or 2 things before walking back to the body in an attempt to cover it up. He then walks away from Courtney's body, later putting his hands on his head. So although Aaron or Juanita did not identify him, Mortimer Saunders was later identified as the man in the video by a childhood friend. Like I said, tight-knit community, everyone knows one another. The search for Courtney Pieters had now become the search for Courtney Pieters' killer. That Sunday, the 15th of May, all the adult males in the home were asked to give DNA so that they could be excluded as suspects. Of course, they were more than willing to oblige, as they didn't want to be suspects in this case. However, when it came time for it, Mortimer was nowhere to be found. He had then later told police via a phone call that he would come to the station to give his sample, but he never pitched. Surprise, surprise. So the police basically had Mortimer due to the confirmed sighting in the CCTV footage, along with the fact that he had not given them DNA. So later that day, the police arrived at Juanita and Aaron's home with the K9 unit. The dogs from that unit are trained in blood fluid investigation. A dog's sense of smell is anywhere between 10,000 to 100,000 times more accurate than a human's. So you best believe if you've done something dodgy, there's no hiding it from them. The dog had then immediately run to Mortimer's room. To be sure, they had removed the dog a few times from the room and the house. However, each and every time it had returned there. In later photographs of the crime scene, there are pools of blood in the fridge that cannot be explained, as well as a stench that permeated the air. Some items from the room were then also taken for testing. So whilst this was all going on, Juanita had actually approached the police officers and the team who were working, and she had said to them that she actually had lied to them before and that she did know the person in the CCTV footage. She had then went on to say that it was clear that it was Mortimer Saunders, but she just did not want to believe it at the time. Mortimer was still MIA whilst this was all going on. No surprise there. But later that afternoon, Constable Bradley Spochter of the Elsie's River Police Station had received an anonymous tip-off from a female giving him directions to a house in Jonah Street where Mortimer was believed to be. Constable Spochter had then entered the separate entrance of the property, to which he had found Mortimer nonchalantly sitting on a chair watching television. Not a care in the world. I mean, it wasn't like he was evading arrest for a murder or anything. And you know what? He was actually wearing the exact same outfit that he was wearing on the CCTV footage. A red golf shirt, a pair of jeans, and caterpillar boots. So upon spotting Constable Spochter, he had attempted to casually stand up and walk away, but Spochter was having none of it, and so he had arrested him and taken him to the police station. After his arrest, he soon discovered that he did not qualify for free legal aid, as he earned more than the cut-off threshold. So instead of pursuing a legal aid lawyer, he had initially hired a private lawyer, Tanya Knockler. I mean, this is precisely why I would struggle if I had to be a lawyer. Imagine having to defend people like him. After his arrest and whilst he was awaiting trial, Mortimer did not even attempt to apply for bail because he feared the backlash of the community and vigilante justice, which is quite a big thing here in the communities of Cape Town. He also had requested to be kept in the hospital section of the Goodwood prison after he had received multiple death threats in the awaiting trial section of the prison after people had found out that he was a child rapist and murderer. He was unfortunately granted this via a court order, as they needed to protect him and his life long enough, I guess, for the trial. Mortimer Saunders' trial, after being transferred to High Court and postponed multiple times, began a year later to the day he was arrested. Over the next few weeks, Mortimer had initially made admission of the rape and murder of Courtney Pieters. However, months down the line, his lawyer would then go on to state that he had made no such admission. It was also in court and during the trial that the details of Courtney Pieters' death were disclosed. Jacobus Adriaan van Zyl, a toxicologist, testified that significant amounts of carbaryl were found within the samples taken from Courtney. To his knowledge, carbaryl very quickly metabolizes, which means that it is quickly absorbed by the stomach, broken down, and moves from the blood to the urine. Thus, he concluded for him to still be able to see carbaryl in Courtney's blood, it would point to her having been exposed to an extremely high dose. Although she had been poisoned, the official cause of death was asphyxia due to smothering or strangulation and/or poisoning. According to Professor Johan Dempers, who was the pathologist who had examined her, the toddler had sustained external blunt force injuries to her face, torso, and limbs, along with signs of pressure to her neck and injuries to her genitals. Upon conducting the autopsy, it was evident to see that there was hemorrhaging inside the scalp, typical of blunt force trauma. He then went on to state that it was quite implausible to believe that the penetration of Courtney's genitals only occurred post-mortem. This directly opposed what Mortimer had claimed. Lastly, forensic analyst Lutando Tia testified that he had matched samples of semen collected from Saunders to samples found on Courtney's body. Saunders' defense team went on to argue that the semen could have been transmitted from his fingers rather than from his genitals. Although there was no final word on this, the act that was committed remains the same, whether it was prior or post her death. So as I had previously mentioned, there was very little information regarding Saunders' childhood and youth, and there was no information regarding any psychological evaluations that were conducted. However, during the trial, Saunders had gone on to state that he was paranoid that he would be poisoned by his own mother, his aunt, and even his ex-girlfriend. It's unclear how or why he believed that this would occur, but it is a belief that he held strongly to. And according to his probation officer, he was also paranoid that Juanita would try to poison his room. Saunders had claimed that his actions were not premeditated. However, he had purchased the ant poison over 8 months prior to Courtney's death. And on top of that, not one individual in the home attested to there being an ant problem. This can only lead one to believe that Mortimer was simply waiting for the perfect opportunity to enact a plan that he had already put thought into. As there are only 2 people in the world that truly know what happened, and one of them is dead, his account is all that we have left. The judge presiding over the case, given all the circumstantial evidence and testimonies, found Saunders guilty of the premeditated murder as well as the rape of Courtney Pieters. Saunders' versions of events, where he claimed that he acted on the spur of the moment, was rejected. When delivering the guilty verdict, Judge Babalwa Pearl Mantame had said, Mortimer Saunders' behavior in the rape and murder of 3-year-old Courtney Pieters was vicious, brutal, inhumane, and ruthless. In most cases, these abominable acts are committed by people against the children they are supposed to be protecting. The accused was in a position of trust. She was a defenseless child. The deceased died a slow, painful death. During November of 2017, Mortimer was busted after posting photos on social media. This came after the guilty verdict had been given to him and whilst he was awaiting sentencing. He had posted photos of himself in Pollsmoor prison along with photos of his girlfriend, Candace. He later went on to delete her photos. According to the Department of Correctional Services, prisoners are not allowed to have cell phones or access to social media whilst in prison. No duh. Shortly after the guilty verdict and all of that, Mortimer issued an apology to the family of Courtney Pieters. His letter was entitled Apology to Family. He basically droned on about how Courtney didn't deserve what happened to her, how he was sorry for what he had done, and he also stated that he didn't know why he had even done it. But it was all just far too little, too late. And the family of Courtney Pieters? did not accept the apology. After the apology hit social media, Courtney's father had said, "He thought nothing of me as his friend and nothing of my lastborn. He took my child and thinks a letter to the public mentioning my family and my child that he murdered and raped is enough. I am very sorry, but I do not accept this apology." Juanita had said that even though in court she had forgiven Saunders, the letter had angered her, and so she retracted her forgiveness. She went on to say, "God says we must forgive without question, but deep in my heart, I cannot. If I had a gun or something in court, I would kill him." I mean, I don't blame her. When it came to sentencing, as per South African law regarding rape and murder of a minor, he received 2 separate life terms to run consecutively. One for premeditated murder and the other for rape of a minor. For my non-South African viewers, a life term in South Africa is 25 years. So that equates to 50 years behind bars. After the news of Courtney's death had initially hit the media, the president of the time in South Africa, President Jacob Zuma, had gone to visit Courtney Pieters' family. He had offered his support and a plan of action to improve policing in the area, as well as to buy Juanita and Aaron a new home. He believed that this would help them to heal from the trauma, as well as to have a better environment for the remaining children. They were then given a home in Delft. The gesture was incredibly appreciated, and they began to live there in the second half of 2017. Zuma had also gone on to say that a man who stays here can rape the child, kill the child in the bedroom, and break every bone to make the child fit in a plastic bag. It shows something has gone wrong. You don't say. Look, this is not a political channel, so I will be saying nothing more about Zuma, and we will be moving on. In the months that followed, Juanita said that moving to Delft with Aaron and the children allowed the family to distance themselves from the home that had so many painful memories. Adapting to life after Courtney's death was difficult for the entire family, but they were given access to counseling sessions to assist. Social worker Evelyn Terode said that through these counseling sessions, she was able to establish that one of Courtney's older sisters was blaming herself for what had happened to Courtney, and she had started to act out and started bullying others. One of Courtney Pieters' sisters, Makeup Pieters, would later go missing in 2019 with her face plastered over social media. However, she was found shortly afterwards, but she stated that she didn't want to go back to the Delft family home. So if you want to read up more about that, I will leave some resources in the description box for those who are interested. Courtney Pieters was then laid to rest as the trial progressed on the 21st of August, with hundreds coming out to celebrate her life and remember her spirit. After the story broke on social media, many people were angry, questioning why and how could the parents leave their small children alone. There is no simple answer to this. Yes, it's obviously not right or advised to leave young children alone, but life within the socio-economic situation that many South Africans find themselves in often leaves them with no choice. You must also keep in mind that in Juanita and Aaron's mind, the children weren't technically alone, as Mortimer, Uncle Morty, was in the house and Marsha was still in the building just outside. So I don't think in their minds they could have ever thought that something bad could have happened. Whilst researching, I also came across the accusations and rumors that Juanita was aware that Courtney was being molested or sexually assaulted prior to her death. However, I was unable to find any other testimonies, documents, or articles to substantiate this theory. It's for a similar reason that this episode has a lot less psychological theories than my usual episodes, because I was unable to find enough information to go off of. And the last thing I want to do is just create information where it doesn't exist. Juanita was also accused of not being there during the search parties for Courtney, and due to the aggression of the crowd outside of the courthouse at one stage, she actually had to be escorted from the courthouse. As I do not have any further information regarding these allegations, I cannot speak to the validity of it. The judge presiding over the case did make mention of a possible child neglect charge for Juanita. She was, however, granted immunity from prosecution of that charge for the following reasons. Firstly, the reason that she was not at home wasn't because she was out having fun, but rather because she was at work. There was also a distinct lack of professional support that was noted. The emotional ordeal of the trial and testifying was taken into account. And lastly, the deterioration of her health. She had actually been diagnosed with TB and had spent quite a few days and weeks in hospital during the trial. So, throughout the trial, marches took place, groups against GBV, gender-based violence, gathered, and a reminder was felt to all to look a little longer at the people whom they trust so implicitly. So, I just wanted to make an additional note regarding the lack of psychological information within this episode. If you know me, you'll know that I only work with the facts, and so I did not want to speculate about activities such as previous rape or assault of Courtney Pieters, as well as potential grooming by Mortimer. So I decided to just stick to the pure facts and the things that I have made sure are cross-referenced and correct. With each and every episode, you can be assured that I double and triple check facts, and I try my utmost to ensure that I provide and transmit correct information. If there's ever anything that I get wrong, please do comment down below. Let me know, and I am happy to learn to edit the description to reflect the correct information and to move forward from there. And so we've reached the Bella bottom line. This beautiful little life was snuffed out too soon by someone whom she trusted and loved. Many of the rape and murder cases in South Africa, and actually worldwide, are caused by individuals who are known to the victim. It's impossible to know the darkness that lives within a person's heart, but if we as a community can gain Ubuntu. For my non-South African viewers, Ubuntu is compassion, humanity. If we can go by the phrase, it takes a community to raise a child, and do our part, no matter how small, we can help protect one another. Until next time, my loves, thank you so much for joining me on another episode, and thank you so much for your support. I truly appreciate each and every single one of you. Until next week, stay safe, stay awesome, and stay blessed. Bye!